my question before I saw some of the other videos, but I'll still ask it, is what triggered your emotional response to Candace? I watched a little bit of the other ones, so
You know, it's one is it's one thing to be gaslighted by people who are not of the culture, right? And so you know some people who are not of the culture, and so you get why they don't know, and then also you get their willful ignorance of it. And so, of course, you know me. I dialogue with different people. I'm not closed to the right perspective or whatever. One of my best friends, his parents, he's from Oklahoma. His parents are like Trump supporters and all that and whatever. And I have love for these people. There's no animosity. I get this whole cultural aspect of it. But so um, as I would be having conversations with James's father, right, in the sense of how we would have conversations. He knows me to be an open individual. I know him to be an open individual. So we'd have these conversations, and one, he just landed on his faith, on his fundamentalism within his religion, to say why he supports Trump and his whole position, which okay, I get that, but he in our conversations he sends me these African American white folks.
right.
And so that's what triggered me to like be like, what? So you think because this African American woman champions your perspective that now that means you're right. All right, and so they hold her up and a host of other conservatives up in this way, black conservatives up in this way to say, see, there's black people who think if only the rest of the black people thought just like this. And it's like, wow, So it really now began me to start pushing that narrative and really beginning to break that down. That there is no black people, no white people. There's black culture, white culture, and so there's African Americans who have accepted white culture and thereby are white people in that
Right.
sense. Right? Culturally, you're white. That's the perspective that you're coming from. No disrespect, but again, if what you know and what your foundation is of your identity is based in white culture, then it's problematic for you to be now trying to call yourself black when it's a cultural thing again.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I appreciated that perspective because I agree with you, and that's why, as I've talked to you before about honorary white citizenship. So
Yeah.
to me, she perfectly represented that relationship that I talk about. She not only reflects the culture, but the culture that she's reflected has embraced her as one of their own to speak for them on behalf of them.
Exactly. And so that it's why it was important for me to even go and break down. This is why our conversations have been so important because um, it's been important to go and start breaking down these ideologies and where these people are coming from. So it's like you look to see who she works for, right? And who she works for is this conservative group, and you look into what they stand for and who they are, and it's the very foundation of white supremacy, right? It's like one guy, Prager, guy that she works for, he's an Orthodox Jew. And again, I have no problem with anyone's religion, but when your religion is that you're God's chosen people, and you're charged with giving a message to the rest of us, right? Like, I have no issue with that. And yes, you are God's chosen people, and yes, you are charged with a message. But it's not just you who's been given that message, and it's not just you who is chosen by God. Right? So that fundamentalism that exists within white culture that says that they have a superior message to give to the rest of us, and that's an issue, right? And then you go into the next gentleman, the brothers again, and these are all billionaires. These people, all these very wealthy European Americans, And this guy, Seventh Day Adventist, they believe that the Old Testament is true historically and scientifically. And so again, you see this old world thinking based in what again I would say is just a medieval concept of the world, of where these people, this tribe, thinks that it's um, this more superior tribe to go out and tell the rest of us what God's message is for for all of us, and that's problematic. So for me, you can trace white supremacy or um, the root of white supremacy back to their Christian fundamentalism, and that's where I'm going at it with. Again, these people believe that they're charged with a higher message that the rest of us um, don't have because we're Gentiles or not of the chosen group.
Yeah, interesting commentary, because as you know, as witnesses, I do disagree with that to some extent. But you make a great point. The Bible, God's word, has been used incorrectly as a tool to mislead people and indeed support concept that is not aligned with Christ's teaching. You and I talk about that.
Yes.
You cannot be a Christian and hate. I mean, you cannot be a Christian and kill. You cannot be a Christian according to Jesus' definition, according to Jehovah's definition, and behave the way these people tell you it's okay that they behave. So you're right. You're right. White supremacy has been supported over the years through misapplication of Christian principles. Literally, if we all read, understood, and apply Christ's teaching, we won't be here. We won't be having this conversation. Okay?
But that's the truth.
Right. Or we could be having the conversation in a civil way, not in a way where, when I was listening to some of the things that what Candace was saying, and this other white girl, we were talking about their conservatism. What I found interesting, I didn't watch the whole thing, but when Levine started the interview with Candace and this other white girl, he talked about this white girl's education background. But when it came to Candace, she dropped out of college. So I sit here and I sit and I'm saying, okay, hang on for a minute now. Here you are, in effect, touting the importance of white supremacy, in that the white girl went to college, the black girl didn't, but we're going to accept her anyway, although she don't meet all the criteria. She's not a college graduate. She's not this, she's not that. The white girl was talking about she grew up on a 5-acre farm in Oklahoma. Candace grew up in so what I found interesting in the discussion was where they created an equivalency that didn't exist. Okay, and that equivalency is the way they tried to justify, at least from where I stood, justify Candace's decision with this white girl decision, where they had two complete different experiences. And Candace said something I didn't understand her. She said she grew up with hip hop, and Trump was glorified in hip hop. Mm. I'm not a hip hop person, so I don't know if that is true or not true. But I don't understand how that would be.
Yeah, it's because people don't understand hip hop and American capitalism. Okay. Right? And so when I grew up, that was rap music. And that rap music was our music, right? It was coming from the streets. It was something that was completely underground. I mean, that's why, I'm friends with Dr. Dre's mother, because this was all shit in the streets. Mm-hmm. And so in the late 70s and the 80s, it was still underground. And then something changed. And what began to change was is that the music got popular, right? Run DMC begins to come up and get popular. You get people like Salt and Pepper, and so the '90s come on, and record labels begin to see how big this music can be, and so they start playing with it with black what was it, like black record companies in a sense and whatever. And so so they start dabbling in it. And what you find, there's a good movie you could watch called Straight Outta Compton, right? Yeah, Straight Outta Compton, Dr. Dre. It's the whole story basically of how Dre and them came about, and this was my time, and these were my friends and whatever. You know, like Jinx, some of the people in the movie I grew up with, and it shows you how like the guy over Interscope Records, he made his money off of a song that basically was an R&B song, heard it through the grapevine, and they used that song with the California Raisins.
Okay.
And that song was very popular. California Raisins heard it through the grapevine and all those commercials and whatever. And so they made a lot of money off of that one song. And so now they was like, what else can we do to make money? You know, to get these little hit songs and whatever and make what is the easy money. And so they entered into hip hop or rap at the time, right? And so now these guys who only produced this heard it through the grapevine song creates Interscope Records, and Interscope Records becomes the foundation of gangster rap, right? And so Dr. Dre, NWA's music, Death Row Records music, Tupac, all these different gangster rappers now are part of Interscope Records. Interscope Records makes this unheard of, insane amount of money. Right now, understand we've had black record companies and black music for a long time. And so what changes to where now they're having these platinum records, right? And a platinum record means you have to have sold like X amount of million, records. And so now, in the 90s, hip hop records were platinum, double platinum, quadruple platinum. They were just like millions of records are being sold. And so if you understand that there's not enough of us to have made that happen. And so now rap turns into hip hop as they've moved R&B music and rap together to make it even more pop and make it even to where the white kids love it more. And so what we call hip hop today is actually coon music.
As you were describing this, something came to mind. And what came to mind was integration. The integration that occurred in the 60s, 70s led to the destruction of the black enterprise, the black economy, the black business, the black attitude, the black culture. And what I think I've heard you just say is that there was an integration of that music that represented at one time political disharmony. It was a political message that then became more of a integrated message supporting a culture that it was first opposing.
Well, I think it's important to really break down integration, right? Because there's integrating of actually melding and being a part of, and then there's being exploited. And what you see, I think, even within the 60s and what we see, what we would say with hip hop, is not true integration as much as it's exploitation. Because only certain one of us were allowed to move out and exist within white culture, right? In order to be that whatever, then you have to fit these certain criterias. And I walk a fine line in this because people may hear me say this and feel like I'm being uppity or conceited and whatever, but you have to have a certain mental capacity, right? Be of a certain value to white culture in order to exist outside of black culture. And in having that mental capacity, then you're one of the accepted ones. You're different from the rest, and and we, in the sense of being that middle class, that upper echelon in the sense of a community, of a society, us existing outside of it, being exploited for the benefit of the white culture, now makes it a bad thing for what still exists within black culture. Because now my services as a computer engineer are just solely going to white culture. My services as a computer engineer is not going to black culture. And imagine what my impact would have been if I had have been creating the different devices and things that I was doing for white culture that I could have done for black culture. And so
No, I agree.
that's the exploitation of this misnomer of integration, right? Instead of equality, instead of equity, they said, "Oh, let's integrate them."
No, I agree. No, and the reason I phrase it the way I do is because I agree with you in your definition of integration. That's why I didn't expand on it, because I wanted to see where you came from, although I knew where you were coming from. But the point that I'm making is that this false premise that we're integrating is more with the goal of destroying you, exploitation, and empowering or enriching me. And in effect, we see that in that concept of integration within the construct of America that has led to the condition we are today. Like you said, a few of us allowed to become honorary citizenship and benefit. You think about, you said this Interscope Records have made billions of dollars. How many of those billions has really even the billionaires within the Interscope group have seen? You think about it, there may be 3 or 4 billionaires that's been created. But what is the percentage of the total revenue that they have received versus the total revenue that their counterpart has received?
Definitely. When you find out that Dr. Dre, who built Interscope Records, you know what I'm saying? Bill, Dr. Dre is this genius, right? And all of us in the hood knew it, growing up. And my boy Jinx talking about them doing whatever and hearing the music. We all knew Dre was this genius. He creates NWA in the sense of him being a producer, walks away from that, creates Death Row Records, and Death Row Records does this incredible thing and whatever. Because it was so gangster and so whatever, he said no. He walks away from it. Don't want the money, don't want the whatever. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Because again, he knows he's a genius. He walks away, creates Aftermath Records, same thing. He creates Eminem, all of these different whatever. And Dr. Dre, once he makes these headphones,
right, that's pretty
then
amazing.
he starts to get to be a billionaire.
Right, correct.
But how many billionaires, just as you said, were created off of Dr. Dre's music?
Right.
And this is what we see happening in America. But again, see, in order to hold on to this power, because this is the issue of people not understanding what racism is, right? They distract and say race is about people, it's about color, it's about whatever. When it's like, no, race is about power. And in that, you see that these people are maneuvering and doing things to hold on to the power. And we go back, as you said, if we followed Christ's teaching, we wouldn't be in this. We would be in a completely different paradigm.
Right.
But we don't follow Christ's teaching, and this is what's so important for me to be bringing up about fundamentalism, because these men that I brought up, in the sense of these conservatives, they're not discussing Christ. They're not talking about Christ. They're not any of that. These men are talking about the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, as we've discussed before, God can kill, or God can order the righteous to kill men, women, children, asses, and oxes. And so thereby, these people who believe this in this fundamental way, well, they would do away with. Again, this man is the Seventh-day Adventist. They don't follow the New Testament in that way. They follow the Old Testament in a literal way.
Hmm.
And an Orthodox Jew, again,
Right.
follows the Old Testament in a literal. And so we're not talking about that the new, the good news, right?
Right.
The love that is revealed in a more simple way from the message of Christ.
Right.
And it's that lack of love that allows hate to be godly,
Hmm.
right? To allow war to be godly. And that these men, they stand against God, but yet they use what I again, as a studier of African history, they use other people's stories and experiences to justify their egos, their sense of destruction, dominion, separateness. Right? These people who wrote their own stories that, for me, again, they've taken out of context. And in taking it out of context, created all these arcane rules that even they knew they could not survive off of. Right? If, again, anyone championing God's message, right, the message of love, will create and move things in a way that is undeniable. You can see this happen within people's cultures as they've accepted one another in that love. Egypt did not exist on the back of slaves. This we know because we can read this in the hieroglyphs and everything. This was the lie told by slave masters, by people who would act and be that way because they had no understanding of how to find civility, which is why they had to go strike out across the world in the way they did. But if we can really, I think, break down this old world thinking that this is actual history, that this is godly. And if we can't, and it's the point of monkey bullshit, if we can't point out the hypocrisy within someone's theology, again, if you come up to me and you want to have a discussion about Christ and you want to talk about the devil, I have no issue with pointing out the hypocrisy within your theology, right? It's not to say that there's something wrong with you, but you're coming from a different paradigm. Can we have a true conversation and simply shift that paradigm, right? Satan is just simply something that's opposed to God. And if you are opposed to love, then you are opposed to God and now you are satanic. That's so simple for me.
Now, I love the way you said that. And I want to make sure I understand what you said. In that, if your actions, your behavior does not align with the concept of Christ and that the truth, and I'm going to use that term, the truth about Christ, then you are in effect following the teaching of Satan or the opposing influence to truth. And the opposed influence to truth is not a lie. There are these half lies, these semi-true, what I call them true lies. These lies that has been repeated so often that people believe that they're true. No, these lies that you hear people repeat, and when you ask them to explain, they don't have a clue. And in their lies, that element that I agree with you 100%. There's a truth, and I think in our discussions and in my study of God's word, I realize that there's a truth that God wants us to follow. And I also recognize that there's in the scriptures itself says that there's going to be a entity, a force that's going to try to distort that truth and create alternative and have us believe that we're in that truth. And I think that's where we are in the world today. We are, and you said something many, many years ago that supports that. And what you said was every one of us have our own truth. And unfortunately, it's the basis that drives the problem, because every one of us have our own truth, and we are holding on to this truth without even giving the opportunity to have a dialogue. You sit there, and as you were talking about Candace Owens, if she was to be willing to have a dialogue like you and I have had, we don't agree on everything, but we are willing to listen to each other and consider each other's viewpoint from a standpoint of love and respect. In the world, we may not all agree on
Mm-hmm.
everything, but if we can all agree in treating each other with love and decency and respect, we can overcome the other stuff. Okay, we can overcome the other stuff. But when we prevent that from happening. In fact, you said something a minute ago about the Old Testament. One of the things Jesus told the Jews when he came on the earth, he said, "You are burdening your people with rules you don't even live up to,
Mm.
with rules they cannot live up to." Okay, and in there, that's where we are today. I was listening to Fareed this morning, and he made a comment in harmony with what we say, and he said that um, that the in Turkey, they have moved to the point where they used to have this mosque, and this mosque started out as a Christian church, converted to a mosque, became an open temple where both Christians and Muslim could go, and now it's converted back to a mosque for Muslim. And it goes back
The
to
Byzantine Empire.
yeah, and it goes back to that moment, is that if we allowed our institutions, our buildings, to be shared, and we allowed our people to come together and have discussions, then maybe we can overcome some of the challenges that we have. But we don't allow that. You watch the news today. The news today are so polarized. They're so polarized. I watch both sides of it. And when I watch both sides of it, I'm wondering, are we all hearing the same story? Are we all living the same world? Is this the same America that we live in? And it's clearly
No, no. You have what they now call this, and it's important to look at it politically, right? You have the conservative media,
right.
and when I went and visited my friends in Oklahoma, I got to see this firsthand, that their media, in a sense, was different. What they were hearing on the radio, what they were seeing on TV, what was even allowed, in a sense, to be on their cable network at that time, was like different. It was more conservative. Culturally, it was different. So they live in a different bubble.
Right.
And so you have now them actually setting up and creating a larger conservative media, right? There's Sinclair Broadcasting, which is these conservatives buying up all of these small TV stations, and now they've been converting them to be new Fox Newses. Right now, just putting out a perspective of white supremacy, and that's the only way I can put that. Right? It's white supremacy that would want to hold on to you now, trying to say Jesus is white. When you can look at the Bible, you can go, that's just, not true. And of course, knowing that, there is no white people, there's no white landia. So, but yet, trying to hold on to a man from Turkey who's called Santa Claus and say that he's white. And so this is the agenda that they want to push, this perspective that white is right, in a sense, that again, that there's this, what do they call it? Exceptionalism. That there's this an exceptionalism of this society that has allowed it to be what it is.
Right.
And
Right.
Yeah, and so this is now. You said, well, what is this exceptionalism? What are you talking about? And the exceptionalism can be explained in the sense of being God's chosen people, doing what is right again. And this is more, you'd have to dig into it culturally to see and follow this line of thinking of what they're trying to say. Manifest destiny, all these different things are
Hmm.
born out of their fundamentalist theology, and out of that fundamentalism
On
again.
theology.
Hmm.
On theology.
Untheology. Well, in having a discussion with them.
I understood. I understood. I understood.
But if again, and the difference is, the difference is for me, as we sit here and have this conversation, when we're talking as spiritual men, we're not talking as religious men. We're not sitting here arguing over our symbolism. We're not sitting here arguing over, what Christ may have did or did not do and so on and so forth. We are sitting here talking about the message of Christ, meaning that we both know that our emotions, right, how we feel in this moment is up to us, right? It's not up to you. You being upset and so on and so forth, that doesn't mean that now I have to be upset. And because we have this understanding, now we can have this civility and dialogue. But when people again think that the person in front of them is true Satan or is true God, right? And so simply because of how they look or how you may assume, now you're going to just take them as this one way and not see them as this complicated human being, same as you are. And it's that removal of Christ, if you ask me, right? If you people don't understand, like, well, you're Christ, and you're Christ, and I'm a Christ, and he's Christ, and so everybody has the ability to be a Christ. It's not just for one individual to be; it's for us all to try and strive for that Christ in us. And if we could begin to start doing that, and again, for me, this is also a Buddhist teaching, right? It wasn't just the Buddha, that everyone had the ability to get to a Buddhist consciousness, and and knowing that and seeing that, then I believe we would know that that work is for us to do for ourselves. That was that great lesson that you gentlemen as Jehovah Witnesses taught me, was that my emotion, my love is my responsibility, and the lack thereof is my responsibility. And once I can put down my, little digs and little whatever, then we could get to dialogue. But that was my responsibility. If I wanted to have that dialogue, then I had to be searching for that love in my own heart and not simply assume it from other people. And this is the issue, is that again, when people think that they're chosen and there's other people who are not chosen, or that they don't know the message, now they can go beat you over the head with what they think is right. Right.
It's interesting. The term you use, and I agree with it, but I want to adjust it a little bit. We all can be Christ-like, because the concept of saying we all can be Christ creates a challenge for me, and it creates a challenge to me that goes back to the Garden of Eden, when Satan said, "You can be like God." So when we say I can be Christ, then it makes sometimes people feel, and how they behave, that they can define the terms of what Christ is.
Mm.
And how Christ acts. And so the difference in the dialogue in the garden that Satan had with Adam and Eve, he says, you can define the rules rather than you have a choice to obey the rules. So becoming Christ-like is coming to learn what Christ wants and live it and apply it in ourselves. Mm-hmm. Becoming Christ sometimes put people in a place where they believe they can define what that standard is. And that's where we are today. That's why people are in this untheology, why they're in this area where they're distorting Christ's teaching to justify their bad behavior. They're using Christ, their Christness, their equivalency, their adoption of the role of Christ, to justify that the way they see it is right, and the way you see it as a different Christ is also right. And again, that's why you have within the Christian denominations this battle and things that are going on, because they're all right. They are all right as Christians, even though they disagree as Christians.
Well, yes. And this is one. I think it's important to get the full context that everybody who is against this and believers in the Bible are not following the word of Christ. They're not necessarily paying attention to, because I have not seen a single person be able to defend what it is they're doing or saying off of the teachings of Christ. I haven't seen a single person be able to do that. I've seen them be able to now take the teachings of Christ and now go into different parts of the Bible and begin to take just certain scriptures and create a narrative. That, again, if you was to take away those other scriptures and you were just to go off of the red lettering within people's books, which is, again, just the words of Christ, that gives you a completely different paradigm. And I just have to say that, because what I see people do is that they'll take something Christ said, and then they'll go back into the Old Testament or different parts and now use that to tell you what this part meant. And that's how people are distorting Christ. And this is what I mean by Christ in you, right? Because we have a difference in this and whatever, in that I don't believe that there was a man who walked this earth called Jesus. I believe that the story is a story no different than Luke Skywalker or The Matrix and whatnot, of where it's a story to try and tell you how to find those rules, how to be able to obey the laws, and the laws that, again, that you see are based in consequence, right? If you are doing negative things, if you are going against love, then the consequences that you'll get are negative. If you are doing things in love, if you are moving in love, then the consequences of what you get will be things in love. And the difference is simply what I understand I'm getting and what I don't understand I'm getting. And when you understand what you're getting, even your suffering has purpose. And I can go through my suffering and understanding that, well, it has purpose, and be able to persevere and push through in that love, right? That acceptance of God. I know that I'm loved by God. And so I understand that every moment has its purpose. It's not for me to question or go against or reject, but it's for me to embrace, for me to understand or seek understanding in. But again, when people think they already know, and this is the issue to me with any fundamentalist, right? I don't care if you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, right? Yogi, there's anybody who takes their sacred scripture, their deeper truth, and now try and flatten it based on their own ego, right? Because this is exactly, you said, when people think, oh, well, we all have individual truths. Yes, we all have individual egos, but we all share the same Christ or same spirit. And this is what I mean by Christ. It's not, again, this man or this this entity separate. It's something that's in us, separate from my ego of who I think I am. This Christ is the same Christ, the same spirit that powers every other being on this planet. We're distracted from that Christ by that ego, by, again, in the sense of what you may say within the garden, that knowledge of self. We think now that we're this individual, and we move away from what's beating inside us, what's the actual driving spirit that's inside us. That's basically, again, making us have to follow these rules, because it's that same spirit that, again, as I create out of fear, hatred, negativity, that's what I get in my life. That same fear, and people think because folks are rich that they're not paying a price and whatever. When rich folks are some of the loneliest people on this planet,
Mhm.
and being alone is one of the worst things that can happen to you. And so again, it it's not that I'm giving Christ this entity or something of where it's something that can be defined by an individual. This is a universal thing that to me, only another individual can be able to even see if you're acting in love. You can't really know it until you put it out there and see, oh shit. Oh, there's my ego. There's my love. Because how does it bounce off of other individuals? How does it come back to you? What is the consequence of your action?
Well, I agree with you to some extent, but here's an interesting question to you.
Mm.
Can the man Christ and the concept Christ that you just described both be true?
Well, just as what you said of what I agree with, no,
Why not?
because
Because let me ask you this question, because the man Christ is what's described in the story that's told about him. So in effect, why can both of them be true?
exactly what you said, that if a man can now manifest or be Christ at all times, now Christ can be defined. Christ is no longer infinite. When Christ can't be defined, Christ is infinite. It is all. And so, and I get it. I get it. And what I mean by this, what I mean by this is that this is what people are looking for. They're looking for this man Christ to come back and somehow save them, to be Superman among us, and now save us from ourselves. When the story was not about someone else coming to save us, when the story was about us saving ourselves. And again, when I need someone outside of me to come save me, to come, give me love or demonstrate love, and how am I supposed to find it for myself? If somebody walks for me, how am I to learn to walk?
I, there is no issue. I agree with you that we have to learn Christ-like teachings. We have to not only learn it, but apply it properly. Because a lot of people learn or or mislearn Christ-like behavior, but as you said, it's not reflected in their life. It's not manifested in the way they live their life. I'm going to disagree with you on one thing.
So how did they learn it?
Well, again, let me ask you a question. Can you learn something and not apply it in your life? And I'll use your example. I'll use your example. You are a software engineer,
Mm-hmm.
well, knowledgeable, capable, bright guy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you live in your life today?
Is that how I've lived my life today? In a sense of
Yeah.
still, well,
Well,
yeah,
well,
I'm still building systems.
correct. You're still building systems, but the focus, and maybe I'm missing the focus of your life. When I first met you, it was all about the servers and the software and the technical side of it. Today, when I speak to you, I didn't even know you were still building systems. Okay, because that's not who I hear.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the dialogue that I hear coming from you now. So the point I'm making is that there's a clear evidence that the knowledge that you're using in your life today to move you forward is not the same one that you used in the past.
Uh-huh.
And that was manifested a few minutes ago when you talked about that aspect of individual truths.
Mm-hmm.
Because because I remember you telling me that clearly, and
Mm-hmm.
now when I hear you say it, it's like, boy, that's part of the problem.
Well, again, that individual truth is that ego, right?
Mhm.
It is that ego, and you have to acknowledge just simply what is, and that
Right,
people have their egos. And if you don't do that, then you don't really have, you're not listening.
right, right.
And so it's important to understand that everybody has their own perspective that they're coming from. But again, to your point about learning something and not using it anymore. Now, there's a difference, right, in the sense of the scenario that you put out. Let's say that I learned how to be a computer engineer, and now when I went to go and do computer engineering stuff, I kept screwing up. That's the distinction here. Because we're not talking about that you've learned something in a correct way and now you no longer apply it in a correct way. We're saying you learned something and you have never applied it in a full correct way. You've
But
learned
did you learn
something
it?
and your outcome has continued to be the same.
Okay, but in harmony with that concept, did you learn it? If it's yielding the wrong results, if the outcomes are inconsistent with what is supposed to come out, have you learned it?
I would say no, you have not learned it.
It's an interesting point because you could also argue that you've learned it, but you're not conforming and applying it according to the standards by which it should be applied. So, for instance, well,
Come
let's
on
have a
now, because
okay,
we could be talking about math here, right?
no, yeah, no, no, no. I'm not talking about software engineering just
Well,
specifically.
well, you got to understand
Can
as
you misapply something?
as geeks, right? As logical geeks, we understand mathematics to be something that um, isn't something that you can tinker around with, right? That you can apply your own standards to or misapply and come up necessarily with the same formulas. It's very easy to show that someone who is not using math in a correct way, that their outcomes are what they are.
Mhm.
And so when you ask this question of can you misapply stuff, you can't misapply something as beautiful as math, which again is not something that we have created. This is something that we observe.
Right.
And so can you misapply God's message? No, you can't misapply God's message. That is not something that we have created. That's something that we have observed. Yet, people can misapply their own math, right? What they've called math that does not, again, completely add up in the same way because maybe they've taken algebra and calculus and, you know, um, any other understanding and put them together in a way to where they don't work. It's not to say that algebra, calculus, geometry don't work. It's to say that if you've put a book together and the pages are out of sync and you don't necessarily understand how it actually all works, then yeah, it's easy to misapply simply again what you don't understand. It's been put to you in a way that's not meant to be understood. It's not meant to be um, this logical thing.
You know, I like what you just said, and maybe the term that is properly that should be properly used is a misunderstanding as opposed to a misapplication. Because I like the point you made. These things exist as fun, as a fact. Okay, like you said, math. This is how it works. Now, you can misunderstand it in your reasoning and then try to apply it in a way that it won't work, but you're not necessarily again, you're misapplying it, but the fact that is that you're in your effort to do what you're doing, you're trying to change something that is unchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing apply to math or to God's word. So misunderstanding is a better term. I want to switch conversation real quick. I got to go shortly, but the conversation I wanted to switch to is, what's your thought on the current movement of federal police in local jurisdictions?
uh, hmm. You know, I'm a patriot. You know, I believe in what the founders were trying to do. I believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all these different things. I think that, you know, we have a great foundation that we can stand on if we actually applied it, you know. And so my feeling of it is that we're sliding into fascism. It's sliding into a police state that, again, if governors have not called for them, if municipalities have not called for the federal police to come in, then it is an affront to states' rights. It's an affront to how our very system of democracy was set up. That these states were set to basically run themselves in this way. And now, if they needed help, if they needed whatever, then they can call on the collection of states to help them. But never have the collection of states come in and impose something without the call of other citizens saying we need this. So it's fascism.
So the next question is this a accidental decision? Is this a conscious decision? Is this a decision preparing us for something in the near future?
All right now.
Go on, man, preach on.
Well, again, we'll get back to these conservatives and fundamentalists, right? And so, as people believe that there is a second coming, there is an apocalypse that is coming. They feel that there's no need to take care of the earth. They feel that they should be repopulating a certain place with certain people so that a certain man can come back. And so you see these people who follow this theology of apocalyptic thinking. And yes, you know, you can see the Antichrist in action. It is an Antichrist theology to think that war and destruction has to come in order for Christ to come again, right? When again, it's the failing of the society that makes us now have to hit our lowest mark and now have to have us rise again. This is something that we see cyclical. This is something that we can see within God's great work. We can say whatever again about God's word, but in God's work, everything's cyclical. And so as you see a society falling into individualism, away from collectivism, right? And the balance between the two, right? Because the society that's caught up in just collectivism and now loses its sense of individualism falls into what now people get all upset about with communism or socialism. Any ism by itself is an imbalance and now a perversion of the constant work of balance that we all must do. And so what you see us falling into is this individualism of these fundamentalists who believe that it's their way or no other way. And they will do whatever by any means necessary to hold on to their pattern of thinking, their way of thinking, their way of being. And so, yeah, I think it's a planned out thing. It's a set thing. But again, as I look at it historically, this is what happens with civilizations as they lose sight of the collective and the individual, right? Again, you have to give reference and an understanding to the ego. And you also have to give reference and an understanding to the spirit. And if you think again that some people have no spirit and other people do, that's an imbalance. If you think that because you have spirit and now your ego is the right one, is the right interpretation of Christ, is the right interpretation of God, then this is what you see again. And it won't be until we get to a point to where we flatten again. And then we have to see what working together gets you. Right? And we're not working together. And because we're not working together, just as you said at the top of this, we're so polarized, we're not able to speak with one another. Then yes, you're seeing the fall of Rome. You're seeing the destruction of America. Because again, if you have many tongues, then God will destroy the Tower of Babel.
No, correct. And I, as a believer in the end of this system of things, not in the same framework you put it, I do look at a lot of these things through the prophecy. And to your point, individualism and the manifestation of ego above the collective interest is clearly one of the signs in the prophecy. And what we're seeing, as you just described, is what's destroying America today. It goes back to even the point that we started this discussion about Candace and all that. Both sides are creating a dialogue that prevents any opportunity for coming together and resolving, because people are so polarized and so deaf, so entrenched in their, as you would say, in their ignorance, in their misunderstanding. They're so entrenched there that there is no opportunity for us to come together and resolve it. I do believe that what we're seeing is a preparation for November, when, and I raised the question to myself and to others, Trump is creating this dialogue that if he loses, it's a rigged election. The question I have, if he wins, why isn't it a rigged election? because if it's a rigged election, it's a rigged election. Mm-hmm. Okay, if it's a rigged election, if indeed all of these things you're talking about is going to influence the outcome, why is the outcome only valid when it benefits you? White supremacy. That's the dialogue. Okay.
Well, see, again, the dialogue is that white supremacy. I completely agree. But what is it that allows them to go against what we just simply know is the rules, right? Again, what we know mathematically would be the outcome, which is the destruction of America. Because as opposed to believing in, this hopeful rebirth or so on and so forth and whatever, prophecy dictates things will go this certain way. And so there's no reason to deviate. Because instead of it being cyclical, right, something that we can just see in history that teaches us that these are the rules, people get into, and I mean no disrespect, but they get into prophecy of where they believe that this is it. This is all there is. That is ego. There is no end in the work that we see created by God. There's no end. You can't see an end. You see a recycling. You see cyclical things happening, but you don't see an end.
I agree with the fact that there's no end. Okay, but I do disagree with you in that there will be a destruction of, or a termination of what we see today under human rulership. Now, the question that you've just posed, and is an interesting one, is just like with Sodom and Gomorrah or other stories in the Bible where he intervened and terminated the badness? Are we going to go through this cycle again?
Well,
what you're suggesting is yes. What I believe is no, and that's where an interesting aspect.
well, again, I don't believe that he intervened. I believe that again, if you don't follow the rules, the consequences may seem like intervention. But again, if you don't follow the rules, if you don't eat right, your heart attack is not his intervention, it's your divine prophecy.
I agree with that in that element, but there are scriptures in the Bible that tells me he intervened. Now the question, in the way you put it, is the intervention, as you're alluding to, him stepping in, or is the intervention the outcome of what he told you would happen? And it's an interesting perspective. Put it that way. It's a valid perspective, and I respect that because as you said, intervention could already be an element of he's told you what's going to happen. I tell you, if you continue in this behavior of nutritional imbalance, you're going to die. If you continue in this behavior of criminal activities, you're going to die. So he's in fact, in Deuteronomy, and I'm going back to the Old Testament, whether you want me to or not, in Deuteronomy, he makes it clear. There's benefits if you follow the law. There's consequences when you don't. And he makes it, and he makes a point. He says, it's your choice. It's not mine. I'm just telling you the outcome. You choose the outcome you want. Go ahead.
I want to bring this last thing up about the Old Testament and something we said before about consequences and whatnot, and people who learn something, right? And so you said if they have learned something and now their outcome is different than what it was that they were supposed to learn, did they actually learn something? Did they actually get what they were given? Is it true in the sense of what they're claiming that they were given?
I'm not sure the question, because yes.
Well, so the question is that if the Hebrews received God's word of God's understanding of how to be, why did they not have a successful civilization?
Because they didn't apply.
Because they didn't apply it. So they heard and they got this whatever and they didn't apply it. But other people who did not get this word, who did not get this same whatever, why did they have successful civilizations that allowed many people to prosper?
Well, you've raised a very powerful question, and I'm going to answer it from the scriptural standpoint that I understand. Okay, that I look through it at. How do you define success according to who? So let's look at success according to Jehovah. And then if we're gonna, and as we talked about, there's two influences in the world. God's influence, his standard, and Satan's. If we go on the premise, and I believe, this is a premise I believe, that this world is influenced by Satan under his guidance, then outcomes in this world that we define as success applies to his standard. And I'll use the element of white supremacy. Do they think they're successful? Absolutely. Materialism, do they think they're successful? Absolutely. So there's standards in this world that we live in that define success that may be contrary to that defined by God. So to your point, why people that did not, as you said, let me step back and say, all of us know what God's standard is. And you said it before, it's us. We know. And some of the people that applied God's standard that were not identified as Jews applied it maybe in some cases better than the Jews did, because it's clear. It's clear in the scriptures that the Jews misapplied, or more important, they, I'm going to say, disappointed or deviated. That's the term I'm looking for. They deviated from God's standard. And that's why they were not successful according to God's standard. Now, you look at Jews in the world today. Do people see Jews as successful people in the world today? Financially, economically, the Jewish nation. How do we present them?
I think that people do think of the Jews today as successful in the fact that they have the state of Israel, and what they would term in today's standards of success would call that success. But again, that's not
And
what I'm
money.
terming as success. I'm still waiting on you to define Jehovah's.
Well, it goes back to the simple principle we talked about: love and obedience and adherence to God's standard, not our own misunderstanding, not our own desires. Because today in the world, that's how success is defined. It's about me and how I view it, not about how God's view it. And in effect, Jesus made it clear that Satan, as the ruler of this world we live in, can reward those who worship him, can reward those who supports him, can reward those who he sees as his friends.
So to be clear, success is love. That are people applying that love in the sense of God, God's way of love. And again, people applying that love, their outcomes of their civilization. Not necessarily in a material sense of things, but yet in the sense of art, in the sense of worship, in the sense of their outward expression, would demonstrate that love. They wouldn't be a warring people. They wouldn't be creating weapons out of whatever. They would be inventing and employing each other.
Name a culture that you feel were successful that didn't create wars, didn't create weapons, didn't do any of that. Name one.
Kemet.
Egypt?
Kemet.
Okay.
Now understand something. There's a difference in Egypt, which is now termed and named by the Greeks as such. And then there is an understanding of Kemet being what it was when it was building the pyramids. It was a closed society, right? And so there was a time of where Kemet was a closed society. And now we'll get into this, this conversation of, but it was a closed society, right? People come into the Delta, and then this is, again, something you could read within your Bible, but this is something also written within their own words and other people around the area. These people come into the Delta out of climate change and whatever. They stay there for a bit, and then they get prosperous and whatever. They start feeling good about themselves, and they begin to take over all of Kemet. And as now they begin to take over all of Kemet, the people in deeper Africa are upset by this. Like, what the fuck? And how were they able to do this? Because Kemet, being this high society, was not one warring in that way. They weren't ones that had those weapons in that way. The weapons that these people brought were stuff. They were like, what the hell? Like, what's the point of this? We allowed you to come live here and chill. And now you want to come and pillage and do all this crazy shit. And so now people within deeper Africa take on their weaponry, their ways of war, and they push these people out of Kemet, Africa. They take all the way up past, what is it? Palestine, or whatever you want to call it today. And now this is when Egypt becomes this empire, or Kemet becomes this empire, and now has to begin to set up and be this warring empire. And that is what now begins to slowly drive them into this individualism that doesn't allow them to come back and prosper in the same way that they had prospered when they were building pyramids and so on and so forth. The last great time in the sun for Egypt was under Ramesses. And as Ramesses lived so long and it became about him, they had no understanding of how to make it about all of them.
I've studied some of that history, and I have to go back to Kemet because the aspect of it that I at this point recall is that, as you mentioned, the evolution of those kingdoms in Egypt, of the different leadership in Egypt, came through struggles and wars. So,
Well,
so clearly,
the first kingship,
mhm,
right? If you're saying what it took, say, for the Scorpion King to now bring both kingdoms together,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
as they weren't, that was not Kemet at that time. That was just the Nile Valley civilization beginning to come together. This is something that we see within all tribal understandings and whatever, in a sense of conflict, which again is different from um, open warfare.
Okay. I'm processing that. No, I
Right,
the
open warfare is going and taking, right, it's going and now not dealing with, say, just your neighbors that you're skirmishing about over resources and so on and so forth. It's now saying, you know what, I want what
you're
they have.
right. Hmm. And I agree with you, and I think over time that's sort of the mindset that developed among civilization. It became this idea of I'm going to say power, control of resources. You go back to the Europeans in Africa. It was about resources. It was about control of resources. It was about domination. It was about exploitation. So yes, you're correct. And over time, the mindset of humanity, of collective humanity, again in small group, became one of domination, and we see that today. We see that escalating not just in the U.S. but on a global basis. This aspect of domination, and although slavery, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say this aspect of scarcity, of people who think that this isn't the garden, as if somehow there isn't abundance. This is people are arguing over something that is this renewing thing, right? It's like, oh, we're gonna run out of this, we're gonna run out of that. Based on what? That's not true. Where if you're of a greedy mind, then yes. And this is why Kemet had no reason to war like that. This is why a lot of places had no real reason to war like that, because there wasn't so many humans to where they needed to war over resources. Now, they might have needed to war over their own ego, their own sense of wanting to dominate other people, but yet that now need to control the land, need to control the resources. That was something that was unheard of in a sense, because again, there was so much of it. Right, it's why we thought that there were separate races, because those people was way over there and those people were way over there. But now that we are beginning to bump up against each other, and really, I wouldn't even say bump up against each other. I'll say live in a society based on greed, live in a way that we all, me included and whatnot, I live in a way that's unsustainable, that's unbalanced. I can't continue to have one of these every 2 years and throw them in the trash forever, right? And the rest of the billion of us.
You know, it's beautiful what you've just said. You know, over yesterday in our meeting, we were discussing that very concept of the earth as our place, as our home, and how the earth is not only self-sustaining, it's self-revitalizing, it's self-restoring, it's self-healing, it goes through the process. So we know that the reason behind the creation was for eternity. It was something that's going to last forever. But you made a point a minute ago that's very powerful. The problem is that we are moving away from the guidance given to us by God in how to take care of the planet. It's not that there's scarcity. The issue is that we are hoarding resources for our own self-interest. We throw out food in the US while people are dying on the street. We throw out gadgets in the US when people in other parts of the world don't have access to it. If we were to adopt that collective mentality you talked about, and instead of throwing our devices in the trash, we provide it to the other nations that are evolving. Because the technology that we feel are obsolete is leading technology to them. Mm-hmm. So if we were to adopt God's view on things, adopt Christ-like attitude to say, I am not going to throw this in the trash. I'm going to put a mechanism in place where I can transition these resources from overabundance into area of scarcity. And then you create that balance you talk about in the pyramids. You talk about that equity that we look forward to. In the closing of your comment with Candace, you said the top is too heavy.
Yeah.
That's the element that touched me. And it touched me in the fact that it's out of balance. Mm. And the point you made earlier, and we've been discussing, is we can change it as a people if we so choose to change it. But we know that if we both continue, the world continues in their current misunderstanding, we'll never get there. And that's why I do believe that the only true solution is God intervening with however he does it. However he does it. It's his kingdom, is his rulership, is his standards of us living on earth. In fact, one of the comments was made in the lesson. It says this: is each one of us is responsible for the piece of earth that God has granted us. So think about that. If each one of us was think about, this is my piece of the earth that God has given me responsible for. I'm gonna take care of it. Not only physically, but spiritually and everything else. Imagine the beauty, imagine the power, imagine the green, imagine the concept in the Bible that says that there will be abundance of everything. There'll be abundance of food in the desert, in the mountains, everywhere. There will be equity. There will be balance. You know, my daughter showed me the other day, picked us up from the airport, and she showed me a housing, a bunch of homeless people on the side of the freeway. And traveling a lot, I've seen homelessness just rampant, not just in the US, but all over. Mm-hmm. I asked myself a question. And it came from my wife and I drove across to Iowa the other day. And there was so much open land. There was so much places where people could live. The scripture in the Bible came to mind where Jehovah says, people will build their own homes and live in them. Hmm. They will have shelter. They will have food. And I'm sitting here thinking, we could do that today if we choose. But it's not the earth. It's not the resources. That's the problem. It's the attitude.
And the attitude of everybody having their own truth?
Well, no. The attitude, well, that part, in part. But the attitude is that as the scripture says, we, the time we're living in, people are going to be about themselves, not about the collective interest of all. Mm-hmm. And I see that. I see that manifested. Again, in the homelessness, in the scarcity, even today with COVID-19. Okay, whether it says my right supersedes anything. When the government says we need to put kids in school because it's in their best interest, when the truth that they're trying to say is economically we cannot move forward. I am hurting economically if the kids are not in school because the parents can't go to work. See, we have created a system that's dependent. The concept of white supremacy, and I made a note that I wanted to talk to you about, but I'm gonna have to wrap up in a minute. But the concept of white supremacy created another thought in my mind, and the thought was, where is that thing? Of black. Okay, where is it? You talk about white supremacy culture versus white people, and then my question was, what's the opposite of that? Is it the black inferiority culture versus black people? And the reason I say that is that white supremacy can only exist if there is a counterbalancing culture or behavior. So what is that? and maybe it's something, you can give it to me in 5 minutes or less, but maybe it's a discussion for next week.
Well, it's simple again, right? White supremacy in the sense of someone's supremacy, someone's believing that their perspective is the right one, the true one, right? And so, in a sense, people have to create this beginning and this end. And so,
So, is there a black supremacy culture?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so your exact argument is indeed an interesting one, because you're right. If there is a dialogue of who is supreme, then we will always continue in this struggle that we have.
Exactly. It's this thing that I'm trying to get to real quick. There's these two guys who just got in trouble. Nick Cannon got in trouble for saying something about some anti-Semitism. God, I can't remember. It was basically, I was pointing out how Nick Cannon got in trouble because he was listening to black extremists. And right. Candace Owens is in trouble because she's listening to white extremists. And so you have these both of these extremists creating each other. They need each other in order to exist.
Perfect. And what's interesting in the point you're making is that when I was thinking about this, white supremacy requires a concept of black inferiority. Mm-hmm. So then black superiority would actually then require the white inferiority. Mm-hmm. So in effect, and I think we talked about this the last time, when white people hear BLM, they're hearing blacks are superior. Black wants to be superior to whites. Mm-hmm. And again, the question is, is that the dialogue that the BLM is, that Black Lives Matter is the dialogue that they're trying to present is, we want to be superior to you, therefore you become inferior? Or is it simply, we want equity? And if we get, if in order to have the dialogue of equity, then both level of superiority has to either be eliminated or be seen as equal.
Well, well, if again your paradigm is one of supremacy, then what you will see and hear from someone is one of supremacy.
Right.
If your paradigm is one of humanity, one of truly listening, then your paradigm won't be that supremacy. It will actually be, now, what is it that you're trying to say? What is? And then when you hear people say, well, what we're trying to say is that Black lives matter too, that because Black lives are not mattering within the systems of America, we have this issue. And because we've continuously brought it up, we've been gaslighted and told that this is not happening. And so, because people are dying and people aren't paying attention, we have to say, hey, Black lives matter. Listen, it's not fair that you're allowing a Sandra Bland to get arrested for a simple traffic ticket and then her wind up hanging in a jail cell, right? There's no investigation, there's no question. And so the point is to say that within the American system, Black lives don't matter. And we're saying that Black lives matter. And so it takes that type of open dialogue for people to listen and hear that folks aren't asking to be superior. They're asking to be included.
I agree with you, but I'm going to conclude on this concept. Blacks are saying Black life doesn't matter in America. Whites are saying Black life doesn't matter in America. Mm-hmm. The question then is, how do you change the same dialogue that they're having? They're just having it from two different perspectives. It's the same message.
From who though?
From both sides. White people are saying Black life doesn't matter. And Black people are saying Black life doesn't matter. It's the same message.
No, Black people are saying Black lives matter.
No, hang on. They're saying to white America, Black life doesn't matter to you. Mm-hmm. We want it to matter to you. And white America is saying, you're right. Black life doesn't matter to us. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to let it matter to us. So the question, now hang on. And the question is, is the peaceful demonstration done by Black people, and is the riot within the Black demonstration done by white people? White supremacy is justifying their argument by participating in the dialogue.
Correct. But we're not speaking to the white supremacists, because again, we understand that there are less people who are followers of Satan. And now when you were talking about an extreme, who we're talking about are now the majority of white America, white culture, who agree that Black lives don't matter and they should. And you're seeing a sea change in how things are being addressed and talked about today. Now, it's not a sea change in a sense of actual legislation, but it is a sea change in a sense of dialogue. I can say that there is a difference within the dialogue that I'm beginning to see happen. And the true dialogue that needs to happen is the lie of this black and white. The true dialogue that needs to happen is the lie of this fundamentalism. And see, again, people, this is where we come back to this, everybody has their own truths. When someone can say that their truth is more important, more legitimate, more justified than anybody else's, when theirs is the fundamental truth, then that's where you get the very foundation of supremacy.
Okay. I gotta go. We're gonna continue this next week, but here's the
with
element.
it.
Here's the element with what you just said. Black Lives Matter truth, they're saying, is the fundamental truth.
No.
Oh,
No.
I'm misunderstanding then. So let's leave it right there. Leave it right there. Let's come back to this next week, because what you've just said is a powerful statement. When either side decides that their truth is the fundamental truth, and in effect, the other person hearing is, my truth doesn't matter, the way I see things doesn't matter, then that's when the challenge of that dialogue gets disrupted.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk next week, same time.
Same time, same bad channel.
All right, my brother. Be
All
good
right.
love, man. Be
Peace and love.
Christ-like. Be Christ-like. Not Christ, but be Christ-like.
That's the point of it.
Love, bro.
Love.
All right.